There are 83 out of 193 independent countries in the world, which are smaller than Scotland. Some of them are very much smaller, countries such as Andorra, Luxembourg, San Marino and Nauru, the latter with a population of little over 11,000. You heard me right, 11,000 inhabitants. Nauru, like all 83 smaller countries than Scotland, has a seat at the United Nations. It decides its own foreign policy in line with the country's own values, and has a voice on the world stage, and all with a population of just 11,000 people. That's the size of Montrose, Stonehaven or Stranraer. Scotland, a resource-rich, energy-rich country with a population of nearly 5.5 million, doesn't. Scotland has no seat at the United Nations and no voice internationally. It's a country that, but for its amazing cultural identity, stunning landscapes and world-class inventions and discoveries would be all but invisible to the world. Well, for a start, Scotland is most definitely not England, yet England decides all of Scotland's foreign policy, including who can and cannot live here. And England, as the UK, controls all of Scotland's massive natural resources. It's the reason England does not want Scotland to ever leave the union Scotland was forced into in 1707. Culturally, the countries are so entirely different as France and Spain, so the only way the union could work is if one of the two kingdoms was totally subdued by the other. So Scotland, far from being a willing participant in the union for the mutual benefit of both countries, was effectively annexed and permanently subdued. Prior to that, Scotland had flourished, trading extensively with countries on the European continent, countries such as France and the Netherlands, until England blockaded Scotland, fearful that the Auld alliance with France would lead to an invasion of England from the north as well as the south. While not everyone in a country will share the same opinions, there is clear evidence that Scots tend to have significantly different views on many social and political issues compared with those living in England. Over many centuries, Scotland has placed greater emphasis on values such as the importance of equality and social justice throughout society, irrespective of an individual's wealth or class. We're o'er Jock Tamson's bairns, after all. The same cannot be said for England, a highly class-driven society where the ruling class is made up largely of the entitled, very wealthy people. Problem is, as part of the UK, they rule us too. And Scotland's common good system has been largely eroded and replaced by an English system instead. More recent surveys confirm that Scots generally put more emphasis on the values of inclusiveness and community solidarity, and demonstrate a greater willingness to pay higher taxes to increase public expenditure, to help others less fortunate than themselves, like Norway, for example, now the fourth richest country in the world from its smaller North Sea oil sector. Norway outperforms most countries in jobs, work-life balance, education, health, environmental quality, social connections, civic engagement, safety, and life satisfaction. So different are England and Scotland in terms of values, culture, and outlook that the UK could not survive unless one country subdued and dominated the other, and that's exactly what has happened. Scotland has simply been absorbed into the English system based on class, privilege, and a monarch who rules by divine power, in other words, chosen by God, and who cannot be challenged by his or her subjects, the complete opposite to the Scottish system, which has been suppressed. Before the union with England, Scotland had an entirely different system of government, a system of the common good, which, for example, provided education to children, including girls as early as the 15th century, when the country already had 3 universities. In Scotland, the people were sovereign over their monarch, and are certainly sovereign over the foreign English monarch today. England, by contrast, has a system based on class with the king or queen considered sovereign by divine right. In other words, God appointed them, and they cannot be challenged by their subjects. So only the children of the upper classes got an education in England. The majority of children from the working class backgrounds did not. Until 1880, when education was finally made available to all, and then only between the ages of 5 and 10. So different were these systems, that the two kingdoms could not legally be merged because no English monarch has ever been prepared to take the Scottish oath of accession in its entirety to become King or Queen of Scots, as required by Scots law, as they did not want to cede any sovereignty to the people, and refused to acknowledge that the people in Scotland were, and still are, sovereign over them. So it is that, as an annexed country, rather than the ridiculous narrative of being an equal partner in a union of equals, Scotland finds itself with no voice internationally. It is regarded as no more than a part of England which countries around the world regard as the UK. Yet because of the difference in the way the two countries see things, not least the common good, the people of Scotland have a very different outlook on a whole range of topics including international affairs. Boosted by the Thatcher government of the 1980s, England has moved in the opposite direction, putting unfettered profit, privatisation, the slashing of public services ahead of the public, or common good. Scotland has proportionately higher levels of charitable donations and volunteering than England, and a more welcoming approach to refugees and other foreign immigrants. With an ageing population, Scotland's population needs are different to England's. We need more people, not less, to sustain our health and care services, and to care for our older population. These differences are also reflected in a marked divergence in political voting patterns. In every UK general election since 1955, the Scottish electorate has rejected the Conservatives. Yet, because Scots have no influence no matter how they vote, Scotland was still governed by a Conservative administration it did not vote for 45 years out of a total of 69 years. For the remaining 24 years, Scotland just happened to vote the same way as England. And whilst in the 2024 Westminster elections Labour regained many of the Westminster seats it lost to the SNP in Scotland, within weeks, Keir Starmer's new Labour government already became as unpopular as his Tory predecessors he is now trying to emulate. With such a divergent outlook between England and Scotland, there are so many policies decided in England that have little or no support in Scotland. According to more recent polls, this has led to growing support for independence, 56%, or, if offered with a well-being approach to the economy and a republic, 67%. Another demonstration of Scotland's lack of influence over decisions made in England was the outcome of the Brexit referendum in 2016, when 62% of Scottish votes, including a majority in every local authority area, favoured Remain, but Scotland was dragged out of the single market against its will, causing an estimated $3 billion a year hit to the Scottish economy. The effects of England's Internal Market Act 2020 is that the UK English government is also deliberately intervening in devolved matters in defiance of the views of the Scottish administration in Edinburgh, which is an executive branch of Westminster in Scotland. This has led to the Scottish administration being forced to use limited resources determined by England to mitigate against the effects of bad Westminster decisions, including the removal by Starmer's government of winter fuel payments for pensioners, which the SNP administration has reversed in Scotland for 2025, whilst its budgets continue to be cut by the government in England. This democratic deficit is a central plank in the case for Scottish independence, and whereas previously most Scots were not confident that independence could at least sustain UK levels of prosperity, due largely to the broad UK shoulders narrative, the cost of living continues to spiral in the Union, thus undermining the central argument of Unionists. Besides, most reputable economists in the world accept that an independent Scotland is well placed to prosper. In recent years, some of the best performing economies have been those of small countries such as Denmark, Finland, and New Zealand, all countries of a similar size to Scotland. Such nations enjoy many advantages over larger economies. For example, more responsive governments, high levels of trust and cohesion, and the ability to react quickly to changing international conditions. By contrast, the UK economy has lagged behind most European economies in terms of GDP growth, and is at the bottom of most league tables. Scotland is already a relatively wealthy country, in the top 25 global economies in terms of income per head. Indeed, it has huge strengths and potential in growth industries such as food and drink, renewable energy, including outstanding potential for tidal power and offshore wind, financial services, tourism, cultural development, including filmmaking, games technology, life sciences, advanced manufacturing, and research and development in partnership with Scotland's leading world-class universities. As the importance of North Sea oil has declined, Scottish economic policy is geared more to a just transition, to environmentally sustainable development, measures to increase well-being, and a reduction in inequalities, rather than simply pursuing output profits. Besides, if countries with no oil or gas the size of Malta or Nauru can be successfully independent, then why not Scotland? Independence will certainly bring transitional challenges, but there is no reason to think that, with the right policies, any short-term difficulties cannot be managed and overcome. Much attention has been given by unionists and the media to Scotland's supposed public sector deficit, a result of billions being attributed to Scotland such as infrastructure projects in England or nuclear missiles. And they say, an independent Scotland will also have to inherit some of England's huge debts. But Scotland is not permitted to borrow, and being vastly outnumbered on the green benches of the English Parliament, has had no real influence over England's borrowing decisions. As an annexed territory, those debts are most definitely not Scotland's, especially given the amount of Scottish resources illegally removed from Scotland by another country, styling itself as the UK. The only sharing of debt might come as a result of pragmatism in the final independence negotiations. But there's also the very real question of reparations for Scotland's stolen resources. However, the narrative that this will inevitably require huge tax rises or public spending cuts has been exposed as misleading by the response of governments throughout the world to the COVID crisis, including in the UK, where the public sector deficit has risen to unprecedented levels, funded largely by the creation of new money by the Bank of England, which does not require external borrowing. As Scotland does not have its own central bank as part of the UK, it cannot just print more money like England does to cover such spending. The key point is that such policies are only available to governments with their own currency. It strengthens the case for an independent Scotland to establish its own currency and central reserve bank at an early stage. Scotland has always tended to be more left of centre politically, more internationalist with an outlook favouring partnership and cooperation, whilst England has always tended to be more right of centre, isolationist, and increasingly neoliberal, a process which accelerated after the Thatcher government in the 1980s. Scots are largely opposed to nuclear weapons, yet all of England's nuclear weapons are based just 25 miles from the centre of Scotland's largest city, Glasgow. Scots are also paying £180 million a year for them. The majority of Scots also think the UK English government should block all weapons sales to Israel. But the government in England is one of Israel's staunchest allies, despite the International Criminal Court issuing warrants for the arrest of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes. There are so many different foreign policy decisions Scotland, as an independent country, would make if it had a seat at the UN and a voice on the international stage. It would pursue a foreign policy based on its own values of the common good, justice, equality and fairness, which would surely be a much-needed voice in the world right now. What's more, because the Scottish people remain sovereign, even if this isn't widely admitted to by Scottish politicians operating in an English system, Scots would have real power over their politicians, much like Switzerland does. But whilst England continues to decide what's best for England as the UK, Scotland isn't even an afterthought. And that is, just like the Union, unsustainable. If you have found this film informative, please like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Find out how you can support independent pro-Scottish television by visiting our website, thescotlandchannel.tv. And together, let's create a better future for our children and grandchildren. Become a friend of the Scotland Channel today. Visit our website for details. And hit that bell icon to be informed of new releases on the Scotland Channel.